Chapter 1. The Rhythms of Rest. Consider your own nights over the past week. Have you routinely awakened without the harsh jolt of an alarm, feeling fully restored and free from the craving for morning coffee? If you find yourself shaking your head, you are among the vast majority of adults in the developed world who regularly fail to secure the recommended 8 hours of nightly rest. While this deficit might not shock you, the biological fallout of such routine deprivation ought to. Consistently cutting your rest short by just an hour or two fundamentally undermines your body's defenses. It decimates your immune system, profoundly elevates your risk of developing cancer, and acts as a major lifestyle factor in the onset of Alzheimer's disease. Even a brief week of modest sleep reduction disrupts your blood sugar so severely that your metabolic profile mimics that of a pre-diabetic. Furthermore, a lack of adequate rest calcifies and clogs your coronary arteries, paving a direct road to cardiovascular disease, stroke, and heart failure. Emotionally, a sleep-starved brain is a breeding ground for anxiety, depression, and severe psychiatric vulnerability. You might have also noticed that exhaustion brings an insatiable appetite. This is no illusion. Sleep deprivation distorts the hormones that govern hunger and satiety, making you voracious even when your body requires no actual nourishment. Trying to lose weight while chronically tired is a biological impossibility, as your body will stubbornly hold on to its fat reserves and instead cannibalize healthy muscle mass. When you aggregate these diverse biological penalties, a stark reality emerges. The less you sleep, the shorter and unhealthier your life will be. The cultural mantra that champions sleeping only after we are dead is an unwitting suicide pact. Indeed, the World Health Organization now recognizes a silent epidemic of sleep loss plaguing industrialized nations, perfectly mirroring the skyrocketing rates of modern physical and mental diseases. Despite the staggering consequences of ignoring this fundamental biological mandate, human beings remain the only species to deliberately deprive themselves of sleep without any legitimate evolutionary reason. For centuries, the scientific community neglected this crisis, largely because the very purpose of sleep remained one of biology's most impenetrable mysteries. While we have long understood why we eat, drink, and reproduce, the drive to sleep completely baffled the brightest minds. From an evolutionary perspective, falling into a prolonged state of unconsciousness appears to be a disastrous design flaw. You cannot gather food, socialize, mate, or defend yourself from predators. If sleep did not serve an absolutely indispensable set of functions, it would easily be the greatest blunder the evolutionary process ever made. Yet, it has heroically persisted in every single species studied. The truth is that sleep does not serve just one purpose. It is a complex, pluralistic remedy that revitalizes every major organ system and cognitive process. We are now forced to flip the scientific question entirely. Are there any biological functions that do not benefit from a good night's rest? Thus far, the answer is a resounding no. To understand how we might reclaim this nightly panacea, we must first understand the invisible forces that dictate our desire for rest. At this very moment, two distinct biological mechanisms are wrestling for control over your alertness. The first is an internal 24-hour metronome, ticking deep within your brain, casting a rhythmic spell of wakefulness and sleepiness over your day and night. The second is an accumulating chemical pressure that builds with every waking minute, creating an inescapable hunger for slumber. The story of the first force, your circadian rhythm, begins long before we understood human brain anatomy. In the early 18th century, a French geophysicist named Jean-Jacques Dortu de Meyran conducted a groundbreaking experiment on a heliotropic plant, a species whose leaves track the sun and fold shut at night. By placing this plant in a sealed, pitch-black box for 24 hours, he shattered the assumption that sunlight alone dictated its behavior. Even in total darkness, the plant's leaves proudly expanded during the hours of daytime and collapsed in the evening. It was undeniable proof that living organisms possess their own internal, self-generated chronometry. It would take another 2 centuries to prove that humans operate on a similar internal clock. In 1938, researchers Nathaniel Kleitman and Bruce Richardson voluntarily banished themselves to the lightless depths of Mammoth Cave in Kentucky. For more than a month, they lived without the sun, measuring their body temperatures and sleep-wake cycles. They discovered not only that humans have a robust internal rhythm, but that this rhythm runs slightly longer than a precise 24-hour day. Bereft of daylight, their biological cycles stretch to roughly 24 hours and 15 minutes. Because of this slight overrun, our brains rely on the reliable daily presence of sunlight to wind the clock back to exactly 24 hours. Daylight acts as the primary resetting signal, or time giver, for a microscopic cluster of neurons nestled in the center of the brain, known as the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Though composed of a mere 20,000 brain cells, the suprachiasmatic nucleus is the supreme conductor of your body's physiological symphony. It orchestrates everything from core body temperature fluctuations to metabolic rates. It triggers the daytime mechanisms that keep you sharp and alert, and gradually removes that activating influence as dusk approaches. However, the precise timing of this conductor's baton is not identical in everyone. While we all follow a roughly 24-hour pattern, the peaks and troughs of our alertness are genetically hardwired into different schedules. Roughly 40% of the population are morning types, waking happily with the dawn and peaking in cognitive performance early in the day. About 30% are evening types, or night owls, who naturally struggle to sleep until the early hours of the morning and only reach their true operational potential late in the afternoon or evening. Tragically, society fundamentally misunderstands and punishes night owls. Bound by DNA to a delayed schedule, they are frequently labeled as lazy because they cannot easily awaken early or function well during the initial hours of standard corporate shifts. When forced to wake with the larks, an owl's prefrontal cortex, the brain's logical command center, remains sluggish and cold. By forcing evening types into early morning routines, we condemn them to a life of chronic sleep deprivation and the host of severe health risks that accompany it. From an evolutionary standpoint, this variation was brilliant. A tribe with mixed sleeping schedules was collectively vulnerable for only a fraction of the night. Today, however, our rigid employment schedules turn this natural variation into a biological penalty for millions. As daylight fades, the suprachiasmatic nucleus begins to broadcast its message of impending nightfall using a hormone called melatonin. Released into the bloodstream from the pineal gland, melatonin acts as a chemical megaphone announcing that darkness has arrived and that the threshold of sleep is near. It is crucial to understand that melatonin itself does not actively put you to sleep. It is simply the starting official at a race, firing the pistol to signal the beginning of the event, but playing no part in the race itself. Melatonin corrals the brain's sleep-generating regions to the starting line, which is why over-the-counter melatonin pills are rarely effective as true sleeping aids for healthy individuals. Once dawn breaks, sunlight enters the eyes, slamming the brakes on the pineal gland's melatonin production, signaling that the race is over and active wakefulness must return. This delicate system faces catastrophic disruption when we hurtle across the globe in commercial jets. Jet lag is the profound biological confusion that occurs when your internal clock remains stuck in a previous time zone while the physical environment demands adaptation to a new one. Your organs, your digestion, and your brain are all temporally dislocated. If you travel eastward, the transition is particularly agonizing. Eastward travel demands that you artificially shrink your day, forcing sleep upon a brain that feels it is only late afternoon. Westward travel is slightly easier to endure because it asks you to stretch your day, working in tandem with your internal clock's natural tendency to run slightly longer than 24 hours. Regardless of the direction, the biological stress of frequent time zone transitions is immense, demonstrably shrinking the brain regions associated with memory and drastically elevating the risk of diabetes and cancer in long-haul flight crews. While your circadian rhythm controls the timing of your wakefulness, a completely separate system governs your actual drive to sleep. From the moment you open your eyes in the morning, a chemical called adenosine begins building up in your brain. This substance acts as an internal hourglass, registering the exact amount of elapsed time you have been awake. As adenosine concentrations rise, they apply a mounting pressure on the brain, dialing down your wake-promoting centers and amplifying your sleep-inducing regions. After about 15 or 16 hours, the sheer weight of this chemical pressure becomes overwhelming, ushering you toward the pillow. Yet humanity has discovered a profoundly effective way to artificially mute this chemical sleep signal: caffeine. As the world's most widely consumed psychoactive stimulant, caffeine works by effectively hijacking the brain's adenosine receptors. It does not make you sleepy. Rather, it occupies the welcome sites meant for adenosine, acting as a barricade. It tricks your brain into feeling vibrant and alert, completely masking the heavy debt of exhaustion that is actually present. The danger of caffeine lies in its stubborn persistence. The half-life of caffeine is approximately 5 to 7 hours. This means that a cup of coffee consumed after a late dinner will still be fighting half its battle in your brain tissue by the time you are trying to achieve deep sleep at 1 in the morning. Your brain must wage a grueling war against this stimulant, leading to fragmented, shallow rest. When the liver finally manages to dismantle the caffeine barricade, the backlog of adenosine that has been impatiently waiting rushes in all at once. The result is the notorious caffeine crash, a sudden, crushing wave of fatigue that makes it nearly impossible to concentrate or function. These two governing forces, the circadian rhythm and the adenosine sleep pressure, operate completely independently of one another. To truly witness their separation, one only needs to experience the misery of staying awake for an entire night and the following day. As you push through an all-nighter, the adenosine levels continue to rise endlessly, creating an ever-increasing pressure to sleep. You might expect your tiredness to escalate linearly with each passing hour. However, around 3 or 4 in the morning, the misery reaches a terrifying peak, only to miraculously lift by mid-morning. This temporary salvation is not a reduction in sleep pressure, but rather the rescue of your circadian rhythm. Your 24-hour clock pays absolutely no attention to how sleep-deprived you are. It simply begins its morning upswing of alertness based on the time of day, temporarily offsetting the massive weight of the adenosine. By late afternoon, however, as the circadian rhythm inevitably dips again, the combined force of the waning alertness and the towering adenosine debt will strike with devastating finality, dragging you relentlessly into slumber. Given the stealthy nature of sleep debt, assessing whether you are obtaining sufficient rest requires an honest evaluation. If you wake in the morning and feel as though you could effortlessly fall back to sleep by mid-morning, you are failing to meet your biological needs. Furthermore, if you rely on caffeine to function optimally before noon, you are actively self-medicating a state of chronic sleep deprivation. A loan of sleep cannot be deferred indefinitely. Unpaid adenosine balances carry over from day to day, building an insidious debt that manifests as chronic fatigue, emotional instability, and physical deterioration. Acknowledging this debt and respecting the immutable rhythms that govern our rest is the first critical step toward reclaiming the health and vitality that only true sleep can provide. Chapter 2. The Mechanics and Evolution of Sleep. Imagine walking into a room and finding a family member slumped on the sofa, completely still, head tilted to the side. It takes only a fraction of a second to determine they are asleep rather than unconscious or deceased. We instinctively recognize the universal physical signatures of slumber: a horizontal posture, a profound release of muscle tension, a lack of responsiveness to the outside world, and the easily reversible nature of the state. But how do you confidently know that you have been asleep? The personal verification of sleep relies on two specific neurological illusions. First is a strict loss of external awareness. While your eyes, ears, and skin continue to register sights, sounds, and sensations, these signals are blocked deep within the center of the brain by a structure called the thalamus. Acting as a sensory barricade, the thalamus drops the perceptual gates, preventing the outside world from reaching the conscious cortex. Second, you experience a chronometric void. You lose your explicit mapping of time, waking with a sense of a temporal cavity. Yet, beneath the surface, your brain continues to track the ticking clock with astonishing precision, which is why you can sometimes wake miraculously just moments before your morning alarm sounds. For much of history, this blackout state was assumed to be a uniform singular block of dormancy. That assumption was permanently shattered in 1952 by researchers Eugene Aserinsky and Nathaniel Kleitman. While observing sleeping infants, they noticed distinct periods where the baby's eyes would dart furiously beneath their closed lids. Accompanying this ocular frenzy were brainwaves that appeared almost identical to those of a brain that was fully awake. They had discovered that humans cycle through two completely different realms of slumber: non-rapid eye movement, NREM, sleep, and rapid eye movement, REM, sleep. These two distinct phases engage in a rhythmic push-pull battle for neural domination every 90 minutes throughout the night. However, the distribution of this cycle is profoundly uneven. If you map the architecture of a full 8-hour rest, The first half of the night is heavily dominated by the deep, restorative trenches of NREM sleep. As the night progresses toward morning, the seesaw violently tips, and the brain feasts heavily on REM sleep. This lopsided architecture is not an evolutionary accident. It is an elegant solution to the brain's finite storage capacity. Think of your memory networks as a sculpture being carved from clay. Early in the night, the deep sweeps of NREM sleep act as the primary excavating force, methodically pruning away redundant, overlapping, or superfluous neural connections formed during the waking day. Later in the night, REM sleep acts as the fine detail tool, strengthening the remaining connections and blending them together. To shortchange your sleep at either end of the night by staying up too late or waking up too early is to severely, uniquely malnourish the brain of one of these critical, distinct physiological processes. To truly understand how the brain generates these states, we must look at its electrical drumbeat. When you are awake, your brain waves are frenetic, fast, and chaotic. Like a stadium filled with tens of thousands of people having independent conversations, different regions of your waking brain are processing varied streams of sights, sounds, and thoughts simultaneously, creating a discombobulated electrical chatter. As you wade into the depths of NREM sleep, a staggering transformation occurs. This chaotic chatter halts. In a breathtaking act of neural self-organization, hundreds of thousands of brain cells synchronize, firing in a unified, slow, majestic rhythm. Originating near the frontal lobes, these deep, slow brain waves sweep backward across the brain's surface. They are not a sign of a dormant mind, but rather a state of profound, coordinated activity. These slow waves serve as nocturnal couriers, picking up fragile, newly acquired memory packets from the brain's short-term storage warehouse, the hippocampus, and transporting them across vast neurological distances to the permanent secure vault of the cortex. Occasionally, this slow mantra is punctuated by rapid, powerful bursts of electrical activity known as sleep spindles. These spindles act as a protective shield, buffering the brain against disruptive external noises and ensuring the sanctity of the slow-wave file transfer. REM sleep, however, plunges the brain into a landscape of pure paradox. The electrical waves rapidly accelerate, returning to the chaotic, desynchronized chatter of waking life. Parts of the brain become up to 30% more active during REM sleep than when we are wide awake. The sensory gate of the thalamus swings open once more, but it does not let in the outside world. Instead, it floods the cortex with internal signals of emotions, memories, and motivations, projecting them onto the theater of our dreaming consciousness. Yet, while the mind roars with this hyperactive, movement-rich hallucinatory experience, the physical body is subjected to a strict physiological straitjacket. Mere seconds before REM sleep begins, a signal travels down the spinal cord, completely paralyzing the voluntary muscles. You are stripped of all muscle tension, rendering you a limp prisoner within your own flesh. This atonia is a masterful evolutionary safeguard. It physically prevents you from enacting the vigorous, fighting, or fleeing motor commands swirling within your dreams. The brain actively paralyzes the body so the mind can dream safely. How old is this magnificent biological ballet? If we trace the evolutionary record, we find that sleep is not a recent luxury. It is a universal mandate. Even primordial invertebrates like worms, which predate vertebrate life by hundreds of millions of years, experience periods of unresponsive lethargy that mirror human slumber. Sleep is so ancient and so universally preserved across every studied species that it forces a radical shift in perspective. Instead of asking why life evolved the perilous need to fall unconscious, we might provocatively ask if sleep was the default, original state of life on Earth. Given the severe metabolic and cellular damage that wakefulness inflicts, perhaps the real evolutionary puzzle is why life ever bothered to wake up at all. While the biological edict to sleep unites the animal kingdom, its execution is wonderfully bizarre and diverse. Duration varies wildly. A brown bat demands 19 hours of daily slumber, while an elephant subsists on merely 4. Yet it is the mechanics of sleep that reveal Mother Nature's ultimate ingenuity. Aquatic mammals like dolphins and killer whales cannot afford the paralyzing luxury of REM sleep lest they drown. Furthermore, they perform the miraculous feat of unihemispheric sleep, They literally sleep with only half of their brain at a time. One hemisphere plunges into the rhythmic depths of NREM sleep, while the other remains wide awake to swim and surface for air. Certain flocking birds achieve a similar trick, lining up on a branch where the birds on the outer edges sleep with half a brain, keeping the outward-facing eye wide open to scan for predators. Humans bereft of this half-brain capability must plunge fully into vulnerability. But how are we meant to sleep? Modernity has shoehorned us into a monophasic pattern, one long consolidated block of nighttime rest. However, anthropological studies of untouched hunter-gatherer tribes reveal a deeply biological human preference for biphasic sleep. These tribes routinely consume a longer bout of sleep through the night, paired with a distinct 30 to 60-minute midday nap. The wave of drowsiness that washes over you in the mid-afternoon is not simply the result of a heavy lunch. It is a genetically hardwired lull, a postprandial alertness dip that screams for a siesta. By severing ourselves from this innate biphasic rhythm to serve the relentless machinery of the industrial age, modern societies have suffered measurable physiological harm, including significant increases in cardiovascular disease. Even among our primate cousins, however, human sleep is a spectacular anomaly. Compared to monkeys and great apes, we sleep for a noticeably shorter total duration, yet we consume a disproportionately massive amount of REM sleep. Up to 25% of our night is dedicated to dreaming, compared to a mere 9% in other primates. To understand this discrepancy is to understand the very ascent of humanity. For millions of years, our primate ancestors slept arboreally. Sleeping high in the trees offered safety from terrestrial predators, but it came with a severe constraint. Become too deeply relaxed in the paralyzing grip of REM sleep, and gravity would pull you from your branch to a life-ending fall. The advent of fire changed our evolutionary trajectory forever. With fire to ward off nocturnal predators and insects, Homo erectus became the first obligate ground sleeper. Free from the threat of falling, hominids could suddenly indulge in massive, uninhibited doses of REM sleep. This nightly deluge of dream sleep bathed our rapidly expanding neural networks, acting as a profound evolutionary accelerant. REM sleep exquisitely recalibrated our primitive emotional circuits, allowing early humans to rapidly decode complex social facial expressions, navigate intense social dynamics, and forge massive, cooperative societal alliances. Furthermore, this hyper-associative dream state fueled unprecedented cognitive creativity, constantly colliding new daily experiences with our vast autobiographical back catalogue to divine innovative solutions. This dense, concentrated, ground-based sleep was the silent engine that rocketed Homo sapiens to the pinnacle of the evolutionary pyramid, forever separating us from the rest of the animal kingdom. Chapter 3. Sleep across the lifespan. The journey of human sleep is not a static biological phenomenon. It is a profoundly dynamic odyssey that morphs and evolves at every stage of our existence. To truly grasp the vital functions of sleep, we must trace its architecture back to the very beginning, long before we ever draw our first breath. The most rapid, miraculous, and complex construction project in all of biology occurs within the womb, and the principal architect directing this process is sleep. If we examine the life of a fetus developing in the third trimester, we find an entity existing in a state of near perpetual slumber. However, the composition of this sleep is wildly different from that of a healthy adult. A fetus spends the overwhelming majority of its time submerged in an embryonic form of rapid eye movement, or REM, sleep. This is not a coincidence, nor is it merely a way to pass the time before birth. During this fetal stage, the brain is furiously manufacturing neural connections at a staggering rate of tens of thousands of synapses per second. REM sleep acts as the critical electrical fertilizer for this explosive brain growth, a process known as synaptogenesis. The brain is essentially populating its neural real estate, laying down the massive, dense highways of connectivity that will eventually dictate thought, movement, and emotion. The necessity of this unadulterated REM sleep for the developing brain is absolute. When this delicate process is disrupted, the architectural consequences are severe. Consider the tragic reality of maternal alcohol consumption. Alcohol is one of the most potent suppressors of REM sleep known to science. When a pregnant mother consumes alcohol, It readily crosses the placental barrier, rapidly suppressing the fetus's REM sleep. The infant's brain is suddenly starved of the very electrical stimulation it desperately needs to wire its cognitive networks. This is the tragic underlying mechanism of fetal alcohol syndrome, which manifests as profound cognitive impairments, behavioral abnormalities, and structural brain deficits. Even long after birth, the neonatal brain continues to gorge on REM sleep, requiring vast quantities of it to finalize the initial construction of the mind. As a child grows and transitions from infancy into early childhood, a magnificent neurological shift begins to take place. The brain's hunger for the hyperactive state of REM sleep slowly begins to subside, and a new, dominant biological force takes the stage: deep, non-rapid eye movement, or NREM sleep. If REM sleep is the architect that builds the initial sprawling neural metropolis, deep NREM sleep is the meticulous urban planner that comes in afterward to optimize the city. Throughout childhood, the brain uses the slow, synchronized brainwaves of NREM sleep to perform an essential task called synaptic pruning. Having overbuilt the neural networks during the fetal and infant stages, the brain must now sculpt and refine them, paring away redundant, weak, or unnecessary connections. This deep sleep pruning process sharpens the mind, making it faster, more efficient, and structurally sound. It is a biological sculpting process that allows a child's cognitive abilities, motor skills, and logical reasoning to flourish. Without massive, uninterrupted blocks of deep NREM sleep, a child's brain remains an overgrown, inefficient thicket of neural pathways. This process of brain maturation reaches a magnificent, albeit chaotic, crescendo during adolescence. The teenage years are marked by the final, most dramatic wave of deep, sleep-driven brain pruning, specifically targeting the frontal lobes, the region responsible for rational thought, impulse control, and complex decision-making. Because the frontal lobe is the very last part of the brain to be sculpted, teenagers frequently rely on the more primitive emotional centers of their brain, leading to the erratic, impulsive behavior synonymous with adolescence. However, adolescence introduces a second, highly disruptive change to a teenager's sleep architecture, a massive forward shift in their circadian rhythm. As a child enters puberty, their internal 24-hour clock is violently thrust forward by several hours. An adolescent who previously went to bed happily at 8 o'clock in the evening will suddenly find it biologically impossible to fall asleep before 11 o'clock or midnight. This is not stubbornness, defiance, or a behavioral choice. It is an unavoidable, genetically mandated biological command. Their brain is not releasing melatonin. Their sleep pressure has been artificially delayed. Consequently, they are biologically programmed to wake up much later in the morning. Tragically, modern society treats this biological shift as a moral failing. We force teenagers to awaken at the crack of dawn to catch school buses, demanding that their brains perform complex academic tasks at an hour when their internal clock is screaming that it is still the middle of the night. Waking a teenager at 6 in the morning is the biological equivalent of waking a 50-year-old adult at 3 in the morning. By forcing early school start times, we are chronically sleep-depriving our youth during the exact developmental window when their brains require rest the most, directly contributing to the modern epidemic of adolescent anxiety, depression, and academic burnout. The friction between a teenager and their parents over bedtime and waking hours is a completely manufactured crisis, born of a societal failure to understand human biology. As we traverse into adulthood and eventually midlife, the architecture of our sleep undergoes yet another profound transformation, but this one is a narrative of decline. Beginning as early as our late 20s and early 30s, the quality and quantity of our deep NREM sleep begins to quietly erode. By the time an individual reaches their 4th decade of life, they will have lost up to 70% of the deep sleep they enjoyed as a young adult. By age 70, they will have lost almost 90%. The slow, powerful brainwaves that once unified the mind in deep rest become smaller, weaker, and highly fragmented. Compounding this loss of deep sleep is a cruel reversal of the circadian rhythm. In stark contrast to the adolescent forward shift, the aging brain's internal clock regresses, pulling bedtime earlier and earlier into the evening. An older adult might find themselves nodding off in an armchair at 7 or 8 o'clock at night. Because they fall asleep so early, their adenosine sleep pressure dissipates by the early hours of the morning, causing them to wake naturally at 3 or 4 o'clock, completely unable to return to sleep. Perhaps the most disruptive change in old age, however, is the severe fragmentation of sleep. Older adults are continually awakened throughout the night, often due to physical ailments, joint pain, or weakened bladders. Because their sleep is constantly punctured by these awakenings, their sleep efficiency, the percentage of time spent in bed actually sleeping, plummets. This brings us to one of the most dangerous and persistent myths in modern medicine, the belief that older people simply need less sleep. This is categorically false. Older adults need just as much sleep as they did in their mid-20s. They are simply unable to generate it. The brain regions responsible for producing deep sleep undergo severe deterioration as we age. It is a cruel biological paradox. The aging brain desperately needs the restorative, memory-consolidating power of deep NREM sleep, but it lacks the structural integrity to produce it. This silent theft of deep sleep is not merely a frustrating inconvenience of aging, it is a deadly physiological hazard. The loss of deep NREM sleep is now recognized as a primary, driving factor in the onset of cognitive decline and Alzheimer's disease. Without the cleansing waves of deep sleep, the aging brain cannot flush out the metabolic toxins that accumulate during the day, allowing the very amyloid plaques associated with Alzheimer's to build up and suffocate the neural networks. We are currently treating the sleep disruption of the elderly as a normal, benign symptom of aging rather than the critical medical emergency it truly is. Chapter 4. The Brain's Night Shift. Long before the advent of functional magnetic resonance imaging and modern neurological mapping, human intuition grasped the profound cognitive benefits of slumber. Mothers have instinctively told their children to sleep on a problem, recognizing that a night of rest offers a peculiar form of mental clarity. William Shakespeare famously exalted sleep as the chief nourisher in life's feast and the great balm of hurt minds. Today, science has meticulously validated these ancestral intuitions, revealing that sleep is not merely a passive state of rest, but an intensely active, highly demanding neurological operation. The brain on night shift is performing a series of miraculous tasks that cannot be accomplished during the waking hours, serving as the ultimate foundational pillar of human memory, learning, and physical mastery. To appreciate the sheer scale of what sleep achieves for our memory, we must look at the cognitive life cycle of a single piece of information. The brain's relationship with learning requires sleep at 3 entirely distinct stages. First, you need sleep prior to learning to prepare the mind, acting like a dry sponge ready to soak up new experiences. Second, you desperately need sleep after learning to take those newly acquired, fragile memories and permanently cement them into the neural architecture. Finally, you need sleep to perform the delicate art of forgetting, actively pruning away useless information to ensure your cognitive workspace does not become cluttered with trivial static. Consider what happens when you attempt to learn something new after being deprived of rest. The human brain possesses a remarkable structure called the hippocampus, nestled deep within its center. You can think of the hippocampus as the brain's short-term memory reservoir, or analogous to a computer's temporary USB drive. It is highly adept at capturing new incoming information rapidly. However, its storage capacity is severely limited. When you remain awake for extended periods, this temporary reservoir fills to the brim. Without sleep to clear the cache, the hippocampus effectively locks its doors. Incoming files bounce back, unable to be written into the neural circuitry. The waterlogged sponge can hold no more drops. An all-nighter pulled in the desperate hope of cramming for an exam does not just yield diminishing returns, it creates an absolute blockade against new learning, rendering the brain completely incapable of absorbing facts. It is during the lighter stages of non-rapid eye movement, or NREM sleep, that the brain executes a brilliant solution to this storage problem. Throughout the night, your brain is bathed in powerful, rhythmic electrical bursts known as sleep spindles. These spindles act like nocturnal couriers. They methodically sweep through the hippocampus, gathering up the temporary files and transferring them across vast neural distances to the brain's massive, long-term storage vault, the neocortex. This magnificent file transfer mechanism empties the short-term reservoir, refreshing your capacity to learn. When you awake, your hippocampus is pristine, wiped clean of yesterday's data, and perfectly primed to absorb the challenges of a new day. But what of the memories you manage to acquire during the day? When a new fact is first learned, it exists in a highly precarious, fragile state. If you were to stay awake indefinitely after learning something new, that memory would rapidly decay, vulnerable to being overwritten or simply fading away into oblivion. Sleep acts as the supreme neurological fixative. It effectively hits the save button on your newly created files. During the deepest stages of NREM sleep, the slow, unified brainwaves continuously replay the day's experiences, firing the exact same neural patterns that were active when you originally learned the information. This nighttime repetition is not a redundant echo. It is the physical mechanism by which the memory is fortified. The brain is quite literally strengthening the synaptic connections, ensuring the memory becomes permanent, durable, and immune to the erosive forces of waking life. However, memory consolidation is only half of the nighttime equation. If we remembered every single mundane detail of our waking existence, the temperature of the doorknob, the exact phrasing of a trivial advertisement, the color of a passing car, our minds would become paralyzed by an overwhelming avalanche of useless data. To maintain cognitive brilliance, the brain must actively curate. It must forget. Sleep possesses a miraculous, highly discerning ability to sift through the day's experiences, identifying the valuable signals and discarding the useless noise. During the night, the brain deliberately weakens the neural connections associated with trivial information, actively erasing them from our mental hard drive. This targeted forgetting is not a failure of memory, but a vital pruning process. By clearing out the cognitive clutter, sleep ensures that our essential memories shine brighter and our minds remain sharp, focused, and unburdened. This extraordinary restorative power extends far beyond facts and figures, reaching deeply into the realm of physical skill and creative insight. We have all experienced the frustrating phenomenon of a learning plateau. A musician practicing a difficult piano sonata, an athlete perfecting a tennis serve, or a surgeon mastering a complex motor sequence will eventually reach a point in the afternoon where they simply cannot improve any further. The mind and muscles stubbornly refuse to execute the task with any greater precision. The conventional wisdom that practice makes perfect is fundamentally flawed. Practice alone does not make perfect. Practice followed by a full night of sleep makes perfect. If you test that same musician or athlete the following morning after a night of restorative slumber, their performance will have magically improved by 20 to 30%. The rough edges of their execution will have been entirely smoothed out. This happens because muscle memory is a misnomer. Muscles have no memory. The memory of a physical movement resides entirely within the motor circuits of the brain. During the final hours of the night, specifically during lighter stages of NREM sleep rich in sleep spindles, the brain plays back the motor sequences you practiced during the day. It does this at warp speed, over and over again, effectively upgrading the software of your motor cortex while you lie paralyzed in bed. The brain discovers efficiencies, coordinates the firing of motor neurons, and perfects the physical choreography. You literally wake up physically more capable of performing the task than when you put your head on the pillow. Chapter 5. The Perils of Sleep Deprivation. There is a profound, silent danger in the cultural normalization of fatigue. We readily boast about how little rest we require, wearing our exhaustion as a badge of honor, a twisted metric of our dedication and productivity. Yet, the biological reality of this deprivation is so severely damaging that it defies human intuition. To understand the sheer lethality of staying awake, one only needs to look at the policies of the Guinness Book of World Records. While the organization continues to sanction records for incredibly dangerous feats, from freediving to extreme physical endurance, it has permanently banned any attempts to break the world record for voluntary sleep deprivation. The governing board recognized an undeniable medical truth. Starving the body of slumber is an act of catastrophic self-harm, one that universally results in profound physical and psychological breakdown, and ultimately, death. The first casualty of this neural starvation is your ability to sustain attention. When the brain is denied its necessary rest, it does not simply suffer a smooth linear decline in focus. Instead, it begins to experience catastrophic failures known as microsleeps. These are terrifying, momentary lapses in consciousness lasting anywhere from a fraction of a second to several seconds. During a microsleep, your brain becomes completely blind to the outside world. Your eyes may remain open, staring blankly ahead, but your visual cortex and conscious perception have entirely shut down. You are, for a brief and deadly moment, entirely offline. Nowhere is the phenomenon of the microsleep more devastating than on the road. When a severely fatigued driver pilots a 2-ton vehicle at highway speeds, a 2-second microsleep means the car travels the length of a football field entirely devoid of human control. The driver does not react slowly. They do not react at all. There is no braking, no swerving, no attempt to mitigate the disaster. For this reason, drowsy driving is not merely a parallel to drunk driving. It is demonstrably worse. It claims more lives annually than alcohol and drugs combined. Yet, society lacks the rigorous testing and severe legal frameworks for fatigue that we apply to intoxication, leaving our highways exposed to a relentless, invisible threat. The tragedy of this impairment is compounded by a dangerous psychological illusion. You do not know how sleep-deprived you are when you are sleep-deprived. When individuals are chronically restricted to 5 or 6 hours of rest per night, their objective performance on cognitive tests plummets dramatically, worsening with each passing day. However, when asked to subjectively rate their own level of fatigue, these same individuals consistently underreport their exhaustion. After a few days of restriction, the brain stubbornly recalibrates its baseline. The individual forgets what it actually feels like to be fully alert, vibrant, and functioning at peak capacity. They adapt to a degraded state of existence, falsely believing they are performing adequately while their cognitive architecture quietly collapses around them. As concentration shatters, the brain's emotional command centers also undergo a radical, terrifying transformation. Deep within the brain lies a primitive structure called the amygdala, which acts as the neurological alarm system, responsible for generating strong emotions like fear, anger, and aggression. In a well-rested brain, the amygdala is tightly regulated by the prefrontal cortex, the logical reasoning center of the brain situated just behind the forehead. The prefrontal cortex acts as a neurological brake, applying context and mature restraint to our primal impulses. Sleep deprivation entirely severs this vital neurological bridge. Without rest, the prefrontal cortex goes offline, releasing its restraining grip on the emotional centers. The amygdala becomes violently hyperreactive, up to 60% more responsive to negative stimuli. The sleep-deprived individual is stripped of their emotional armor, rendered utterly incapable of placing events into perspective. This is why a night of poor sleep causes us to snap at loved ones, misinterpret benign comments as severe threats, and swing wildly between unprovoked anger and giddy, irrational euphoria. We regress to a state of primitive emotional volatility, entirely at the mercy of our unbridled neurological impulses. The devastation, however, does not remain confined to the skull. The physiological tsunami of sleep loss crashes relentlessly through the entire body, aggressively dismantling the cardiovascular system. When you are sleep-deprived, your sympathetic nervous system, the biological gear responsible for the fight-or-flight response, becomes locked in an active state. Stress hormones like cortisol flood the bloodstream, constricting blood vessels and forcing the heart to work exponentially harder. Blood pressure skyrockets. The delicate inner lining of the coronary arteries becomes inflamed and severely damaged, creating the perfect environment for plaque to accumulate. The heart's vulnerability to even the slightest reduction in rest is staggering. We see a tragic global experiment proving this fact every year during the transition to daylight saving time. In the spring, when over 1 billion individuals lose a single hour of sleep, there is a massive, statistically undeniable spike in heart attacks the very next day. Conversely, in the autumn, when we gain an hour of sleep, heart attack rates dramatically plummet. Your cardiovascular system is so delicately balanced on the fulcrum of sleep that a mere 60 minutes of deprivation is enough to push a vulnerable heart into sudden, lethal failure. Simultaneously, the body's metabolic framework is plunged into chaos. Chronic fatigue actively sabotages the endocrine system, specifically the hormones that dictate hunger and satiety. Leptin, the hormone that signals you are full, is severely suppressed. Ghrelin, the hormone that triggers intense hunger, is wildly amplified. The sleep-deprived individual is therefore driven by a relentless, biologically mandated famine, leading to massive overconsumption of calories, specifically craving dense, sugary, and carbohydrate-heavy foods. Furthermore, a lack of rest forces the body's cells to become stubbornly resistant to insulin. Even if you eat a healthy meal, your cells refuse to open their channels to absorb the circulating glucose. Blood sugar levels remain dangerously high, forcing the body into a state that identically mimics prediabetes. It is a metabolic catastrophe that ensures rapid weight gain, stubborn fat retention, and the rapid onset of severe metabolic disorders. The erosion extends deeply into the reproductive system and the very fabric of physical aging. In men, routine sleep restriction radically diminishes testosterone levels, effectively aging a man's hormonal profile by over a decade, while simultaneously decimating sperm count and reproductive viability. Similar, equally devastating impairments occur in the female reproductive cycle, drastically reducing fertility and increasing the likelihood of complications. At the microscopic level, the physical shoelaces of your DNA, known as telomeres, physically degrade and snap when deprived of rest, effectively accelerating the biological aging process of every cell in your body. Yet perhaps the most terrifying biological consequence of exhaustion is the profound, silent dismantling of the immune system. Every single day, rogue, cancerous cells develop within your body. What prevents these cells from multiplying into lethal tumors is a formidable fleet of immune assassins known as natural killer cells. These cells act as the body's elite secret service, identifying malignant elements and swiftly eradicating them. Just a single night of sleeping only 4 hours sweeps away 70% of these natural killer cells circulating in your immune system. It is an immunological collapse of catastrophic proportions. The link between sleep loss and cancer is no longer a matter of scientific speculation. It is an undeniable, extensively documented reality. Chronic sleep deprivation dramatically elevates the risk of developing cancers of the bowel, prostate, and breast. The tumors in a sleep-deprived body grow exponentially faster, fueled by the systemic inflammation caused by exhaustion. The evidence is so overwhelming, so structurally sound, that the World Health Organization has officially classified nighttime shift work as a probable carcinogen. To continuously force the human body to remain awake when it is biologically desperate for rest is to actively invite the most aggressive and lethal diseases into our cellular architecture. We are trading the fundamental pillar of human health for the mere illusion of waking productivity, and the biological cost of this transaction is, quite literally, our lives. Chapter 6. The Purpose and Power of Dreaming. If you were to experience the exact psychological characteristics of a dream while awake, you would immediately require severe psychiatric intervention. Every night you experience flagrant hallucinations, vividly seeing things that are not there. You suffer from profound delusions, accepting the most bizarre, impossible narratives as absolute reality. You become severely disoriented to time, place, and person. You suffer from wild affective lability, swinging through intense, exaggerated, and rapidly changing emotions. Finally, upon waking, you experience near-total amnesia, rapidly forgetting the entirety of this psychotic episode. This is the nightly journey into rapid eye movement, or REM, sleep, the biological theater of dreaming. Far from being a bizarre evolutionary accident, this nightly descent into madness serves a profound, life-saving set of psychological functions. To understand how this hallucinatory state is generated, we must look at the brain's neurological architecture when it plunges into REM sleep. Modern brain imaging reveals a fascinating dichotomy, a radical hyperactivation of certain regions paired with a severe shutdown of others. The brain's visual processing centers, the deep emotional hubs like the amygdala, and the memory-generating regions of the hippocampus blaze with electrical activity, functioning at levels up to 30% higher than when we are awake. Yet the prefrontal cortex, the logical, rational, rule-setting command center of the brain, is plunged into profound darkness. This neurological uncoupling perfectly explains the bizarre nature of our dreams. We are flooded with intense memories, vivid imagery, and raw emotions, but we lack the logical oversight to recognize the impossibilities occurring before us. We accept the most absurd scenarios as undeniable truth because our internal neurological lie detector has been entirely taken offline. For centuries, The meaning of these nocturnal hallucinations captivated human imagination, peaking with the psychoanalytic theories of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The belief that dreams were heavily encrypted expressions of repressed desires dominated cultural and clinical thought for decades. However, modern neuroscience has systematically dismantled this notion. The brain is not actively trying to disguise its desires in cryptic, symbolic puzzles that require a trained analyst to decode. Instead, dreaming is a deeply functional, transparent neurobiological process. While we rarely dream in direct, literal replays of our waking days, a phenomenon known as episodic memory replay, our dreams are profoundly influenced by the emotional themes and underlying anxieties of our waking lives. The brain is not hiding the truth from us. It is actively trying to process it. The primary mission of REM sleep dreaming is to serve as a form of nocturnal soothing, a biological mechanism of overnight emotional therapy. Every day, we accumulate emotional baggage, stress, conflict, grief, and anxiety. If we were to carry the full, raw intensity of these emotional experiences forward indefinitely, our minds would quickly shatter under the psychological weight. REM sleep acts as the critical convalescent ward. During the dream state, the brain skillfully dissects our emotional memories. It separates the factual information of what happened from the visceral, painful emotion associated with the event. We wake up remembering the upsetting experience, but the raw, crippling emotional charge has been effectively stripped away. It is not merely time that heals all wounds, but rather time spent in dream sleep that provides this essential emotional convalescence. This miraculous emotional untangling is made possible by an extraordinary, transient change in the brain's neurochemical environment. Throughout your waking hours, your brain is constantly bathed in a stress-related chemical called noradrenaline, which is the brain's equivalent of adrenaline. This chemical keeps you alert, vigilant, and reactive to your environment. However, the moment you cross the threshold into REM sleep, a neurological valve completely shuts off the supply of noradrenaline. REM sleep is the only time during the entire 24-hour cycle when your brain is entirely devoid of this anxiety-triggering molecule. It creates a perfectly safe, low-stress neurochemical haven. Within this chemically pacified environment, the brain can safely reactivate painful, upsetting memories, processing and digesting them without triggering a panicked physiological response. The memory is neurologically smoothed over, allowing us to wake up feeling more at peace with the trials of the previous day. The catastrophic consequences of this system failing are most tragically visible in individuals suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. In a healthy brain, a traumatic event is eventually processed during REM sleep, and the emotional sting is blunted. However, for a PTSD patient, this mechanism is utterly broken. Their baseline levels of noradrenaline remain abnormally high even during sleep. The neurochemical valve fails to close completely. When the brain attempts to process the trauma during REM sleep, the anxiety chemical is still present in the brain, causing the emotional intensity of the memory to surge. The brain cannot safely strip away the emotion. Because the therapy session fails, the brain abandons the attempt, only to try again the next night and the next. This neurological looping is the biological root of the relentless, terrifying, and repetitive nightmares that characterize PTSD. It is a desperate, chronically failed attempt by the brain to perform its necessary overnight therapy. Beyond healing internal emotional wounds, the dreaming brain also acts as a sophisticated radar recalibration system for our waking social interactions. Navigating human society requires the incredibly complex ability to accurately read and interpret the facial expressions and emotional states of others. This is a fragile, highly volatile cognitive skill. When we are deprived of REM sleep, our emotional radar becomes severely distorted. Brain imaging demonstrates that a lack of dream sleep causes the emotional centers of the brain to become aggressively decoupled from the regions that accurately recognize faces. Consequently, a sleep-starved individual cannot distinguish between a friendly face, a neutral face, and a threatening one. They begin to view the world through a lens of defensive hostility, misinterpreting benign social cues as aggressive attacks. By indulging in the full measure of REM sleep, we tune these delicate neural circuits, ensuring we wake up emotionally intelligent, empathetic, and capable of navigating the incredibly complex tapestry of human society. Chapter 7. Dream Creativity and Control. Dreaming, the Creative Incubator. While the emotional pacification provided by rapid eye movement sleep is essential for our daily psychological survival, it is only one half of the profound utility of the dreaming brain. If the deep, slow waves of non-rapid eye movement sleep act as a nocturnal courier service, gathering up newly acquired facts and securely archiving them into our long-term neurological storage, then REM sleep acts as the brilliant, eccentric master architect who connects them. REM sleep does not merely save memories, it collides them together. It takes the freshly minted information of the preceding day and throws it into a vast, swirling associative network, actively seeking out hidden links, patterns, and overarching rules among all the data you have accumulated over a lifetime. This is the biological incubator of human creativity. It is the mechanism by which we transform a dry accumulation of isolated facts into a rich, interconnected web of profound knowledge and wisdom. REM sleep fuzzy logic. To understand this nocturnal alchemy, we must examine the radical difference in how the waking mind and the dreaming mind process information. During the day, our logical brain operates on strict, highly predictable associative pathways. If you are asked to quickly associate a word with hot, your waking brain will instantly and stubbornly produce the most obvious logical counterpart, cold. The waking prefrontal cortex operates with a rigid, tightly focused spotlight of attention, favoring direct, linear, and heavily trodden neural pathways. It relies on a rigorous system of neurological order to navigate the practical demands of the waking world. However, the moment we slip into the hallucinatory theater of REM sleep, this rigid operating system is entirely dismantled. The neurochemical environment of the dreaming brain actively suppresses direct, logical connections and instead favors a spectacular form of cognitive fuzzy logic. The spotlight of attention radically widens, becoming a diffuse, sweeping floodlight. If the dreaming brain is primed with the concept of hot, it bypasses the obvious cold and instead reaches across vast expanses of neural territory to connect it with something wildly distant, perhaps the concept of a sun, then an eclipse, and then ancient mythology. The dreaming brain becomes hyper-associative, purposefully seeking out the most bizarre, distant, and non-obvious links between seemingly unrelated pieces of information. It creates a neurological playground where the strict rules of waking logic are suspended, allowing for the birth of truly novel thoughts. Memory melding in the furnace of dreams. Within this chemically altered state, the brain engages in a relentless process of memory melding. Think of your brain's vast back catalogue of autobiographical memories as an immense, deeply complex jigsaw puzzle. Every day, you acquire new, seemingly random puzzle pieces of information. If left to its own devices during wakefulness, the brain would simply stack these new pieces into an isolated pile. During REM sleep, however, the brain takes these new, jagged pieces and hurls them into the roaring furnace of your past experiences. It methodically tests them against the established neural networks, seeing where a new piece might seamlessly fit to complete a larger, previously hidden picture. This process explains why a problem that seemed entirely insurmountable in the evening can suddenly, miraculously, resolve itself by the following morning. The phrase, "sleep on it," is not merely a comforting platitude, it is a scientifically sound directive to utilize the world's most powerful associative supercomputer. You are instructing your brain to take the waking problem and plunge it into the hyperassociative furnace of REM sleep, allowing the dream state to forge a cognitive bridge that your waking, rigidly logical mind could never have engineered. Code cracking and problem solving. The historical record is brimming with monumental breakthroughs that occurred exactly at this nocturnal intersection of knowledge and fuzzy logic. Perhaps the most famous example is the brilliant Russian chemist Dmitri Mendeleev. For years, Mendeleev struggled intensely with the problem of how to organize the known chemical elements. He created a deck of cards, each representing an element and its atomic weight, obsessively dealing and rearranging them on his desk, desperately searching for an underlying logical rule. Exhausted after 3 days of continuous fruitless effort, he finally surrendered to sleep. As his brain entered REM sleep, the hyper-associative networks took the massive, disjointed puzzle of atomic weights and properties and seamlessly snapped them together. Mendeleev awoke with a fully formed image in his mind, immediately rushing to his desk to write down what would become the periodic table of elements. His dreaming brain had cracked the code that his waking brain could not. This phenomenon is not limited to chemistry. It extends deep into the realms of physics, medicine, and the arts. The Nobel Prize-winning physiologist Otto Loewy famously dreamt the exact design of the elegant experiment that proved the existence of neurochemical transmission, a discovery that fundamentally revolutionized our understanding of the nervous system. In the musical sphere, Paul McCartney notoriously awoke with the complete melody of the song Yesterday perfectly playing in his head, entirely forged in the creative incubator of REM sleep. Modern scientific experiments have meticulously replicated this phenomenon in the laboratory. When subjects are given complex, seemingly impossible mathematical puzzles to solve, those who are allowed a full night of REM-rich sleep are nearly 3 times more likely to divine the hidden rule required to solve the problem than those who remain awake. The dreaming brain acts as an unparalleled code cracker, effortlessly spotting the invisible patterns hidden beneath the chaotic noise of daily information. Function follows form. Dream content matters. It is tempting to assume that simply entering the physiological state of REM sleep is enough to guarantee a creative breakthrough. However, recent neurological discoveries have revealed a far more demanding truth. It is not merely the act of dreaming that solves the problem. It is what you are specifically dreaming about. In brilliant experiments utilizing highly complex virtual reality mazes, researchers observed the problem-solving abilities of individuals who slept after attempting to navigate the labyrinth. The results were astonishing. The individuals who showed the most massive, dramatic improvement in navigating the maze the following day were not simply those who obtained the most REM sleep. The explosive boost in performance belonged exclusively to the individuals whose dreams actually incorporated fragments of the maze itself. These dreams rarely featured a literal replay of the maze. Instead, the subjects dreamed of the music playing in the laboratory, or of exploring ancient caves, or of being lost in a strange building. The brain was actively digesting the spatial navigation problem within the abstract theater of the dream. This proves an extraordinary biological principle. Function follows form. To reap the creative and problem-solving dividends of sleep, the brain must actively engage with the waking problem during the hallucinatory narrative of the dream itself. Controlling your dreams, lucidity. For the vast majority of our dreaming lives, we are entirely helpless spectators. We are strapped into the passenger seat of our own minds, subjected to the chaotic, bizarre, and sometimes terrifying narratives unfolding around us, completely convinced that the hallucination is an inescapable reality. Yet, there exists a rare, spectacular neurological exception to this rule. The phenomenon of lucid dreaming. Lucid dreaming is the moment when the conscious brain miraculously wakes up inside the dream. The individual suddenly realizes they are asleep, intimately aware that the environment around them is a neurological fabrication. When this happens, a profound shift occurs in the brain's architecture. The prefrontal cortex, the logical command center that is normally plunged into complete darkness during REM sleep, suddenly sparks back into life, illuminating the front of the brain while the rear hallucinatory engines continue to roar. For those capable of sustaining this delicate, paradoxical state, the helpless spectator suddenly becomes the omnipotent director. Lucid dreamers can exert voluntary, conscious control over the dream narrative. They can dictate their own actions, summon objects, change the environment, and even choose to fly. While the scientific community originally viewed this phenomenon with deep skepticism, dismissing it as a subjective myth, modern functional magnetic resonance imaging has irrefutably proven its existence. By training lucid dreamers to move their eyes in specific prearranged patterns once they achieve consciousness within the dream, researchers have established a real-time communication link between the waking world and the dreaming mind. While the exact evolutionary purpose of lucidity remains a subject of intense, ongoing debate, its existence provides an astonishing testament to the sheer untapped power and plasticity of the sleeping human brain. Chapter 8. Things that go bump in the night. For all its profound biological power, the architecture of human sleep is remarkably fragile. It requires a precise, synchronized symphony of neurochemicals, brainwaves, and environmental cues to execute flawlessly. When this intricate system breaks down, the consequences are deeply debilitating. Sometimes the malfunction is born of a biological anomaly within the brain itself, resulting in clinical sleep disorders that trap individuals in a state of neurological torment. Yet far more frequently, the disruption is not clinical at all, but rather environmental. Modernity has engineered a nocturnal landscape that is fiercely hostile to our biological requirement for rest, systematically dismantling the very triggers our bodies rely on to initiate and maintain slumber. To understand the internal failures of sleep, we must first look at the most pervasive clinical disorder: insomnia. True insomnia is not merely the occasional difficulty of falling asleep after a stressful day. It is a chronic, relentless inability to generate continuous, restorative rest despite having the adequate time and opportunity to do so. The root cause of this suffering is an insidious state of physiological hyperarousal. In a healthy sleeper, the sympathetic nervous system, the biological engine of the fight or flight response, quietly steps down as evening approaches. Cortisol levels plummet, core body temperature drops, and the brain prepares to close its sensory gates. In the insomniac, this system remains locked in the on position. Their bloodstream is flooded with stress hormones, keeping their metabolic rate abnormally high and their brain waves frantically active. They are prisoners of a neurological alert system that refuses to stand down, leaving them desperately exhausted yet biologically incapable of crossing the threshold into unconsciousness. While insomnia represents a failure to initiate sleep, other disorders represent a terrifying failure to contain it. Consider the bizarre phenomenon of somnambulism or sleepwalking. Popular culture frequently mischaracterizes sleepwalking as an individual acting out their dreams. However, neurobiology reveals a much stranger reality. Sleepwalking does not occur during the hallucinatory theater of REM sleep, because during REM, the body is strictly paralyzed. Instead, sleepwalking occurs in the deepest, most profound stages of non-rapid eye movement sleep. It happens when the brain experiences an abrupt, violent spike in nervous system activity, attempting to forcefully jolt the individual completely awake. Yet, the deep sleep is so powerful that the brain becomes hopelessly stuck halfway. The individual is trapped in a fractured state of consciousness. Their motor skills are active, allowing them to walk, open doors, and even drive, while their conscious, reasoning brain remains entirely fast asleep. A far more catastrophic breakdown of the sleep-wake boundary is found in narcolepsy. This devastating neurological disorder is characterized by an absolute inability to stabilize the states of wakefulness and sleep. The primary culprit is a severe loss of a wake-promoting chemical in the brain called orexin. Orexin acts as the neurological light switch, keeping the conscious brain firmly illuminated during the day. In narcoleptic patients, this switch is broken. Without the stabilizing force of orexin, they suffer from extreme daytime sleep attacks, plummeting into sleep without any warning, regardless of their environment or activity. Even more terrifying is a symptom of narcolepsy known as cataplexy. Cataplexy is the sudden, terrifying loss of all muscle control while the individual is completely wide awake. It is triggered by strong emotions, a burst of laughter, a moment of profound surprise, or intense anger. When the narcoleptic experiences this emotion, the brain inappropriately deploys the paralyzing mechanism usually reserved exclusively for REM sleep dreaming. The individual collapses to the ground, utterly limp and physically paralyzed, yet entirely conscious and aware of their surroundings. They are trapped inside a waking body that has been incorrectly subjected to a neurological straitjacket. Yet, of all the sleep disorders, none illustrates the sheer lethality of sleep deprivation more chillingly than a rare genetic condition known as fatal familial insomnia. This disease is caused by a rogue, misfolded protein, a prion, that ruthlessly attacks the thalamus, the sensory gatekeeper of the brain. As the prion destroys the thalamus, the gate becomes permanently jammed open. The patient completely loses the ability to block out the waking world and initiate sleep. They suffer through months of relentless, unbroken wakefulness. Their body temperature fluctuates wildly, their cardiovascular system begins to collapse, and their mind descends into profound dementia. Within a matter of months, the absolute lack of sleep fundamentally destroys the brain and body, and the patient inevitably dies. It is the ultimate tragic proof that sleep is not a luxury but an absolute biological mandate for survival. While clinical disorders afflict millions, a far more widespread crisis of sleep disruption is entirely self-inflicted by the conveniences of the modern world. For the entirety of human evolution, our circadian rhythms were meticulously governed by the rising and setting of the sun. The arrival of darkness was the unbreakable biological signal for the pineal gland to release melatonin, the chemical megaphone that announces the onset of sleep. The invention of artificial electric light violently severed this ancient relationship. Today, we bathe ourselves in artificial illumination long after the sun has set, effectively tricking our brains into believing it is still daytime. The most destructive culprit in this modern arsenal is the light-emitting diode, or LED, particularly the blue light emitted by our ubiquitous digital screens, smartphones, and tablet computers. Blue light acts as a potent neurological brake on the release of melatonin. When you read a physical book under a dim lamp, your melatonin levels rise naturally. When you read the exact same text on a glowing tablet, the blue light aggressively suppresses your melatonin production, delaying your biological timing by hours. You may eventually fall asleep, but the artificial light will have fundamentally damaged the architecture of your rest, stripping away the restorative power of your REM sleep. Equally destructive and vastly misunderstood is the role of alcohol. It is a persistent cultural myth that a nightcap aids in sleep. From a neurobiological perspective, this is dangerously incorrect. Alcohol is a powerful chemical depressant. It does not induce natural, restorative sleep. It merely acts as a sedative, knocking out the higher functions of the cortex. The state you enter after consuming alcohol is not true slumber, but a light form of anesthesia. Furthermore, alcohol aggressively fragments the night. As the liver metabolizes the alcohol, the body experiences numerous micro-awakenings, shattering the continuous, uninterrupted blocks of deep sleep necessary for physical restoration. Most damaging of all, alcohol is one of the most potent suppressors of REM sleep known to science. It physically prevents the brain from entering the dream state. If an individual drinks heavily and consistently, they build up a massive, terrifying backlog of unexpressed REM sleep. When they finally stop drinking, this suppressed dream pressure erupts violently while they are awake, resulting in the terrifying waking hallucinations known as delirium tremens. Even a single glass of wine in the evening is enough to severely dilute the quality and density of your nighttime recovery. Beyond light and chemicals, we have also profoundly altered our thermal environment. To initiate sleep, your core body temperature must drop by roughly 2 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit. For millions of years, the natural nighttime drop in environmental temperature facilitated this biological requirement. Today, we live in climate-controlled homes, heavily insulated and persistently heated. By maintaining a constant warm temperature in our bedrooms, we actively fight our body's desperate attempt to cool down, causing tossing, turning, and highly fragmented rest. This thermal requirement also explains the seemingly paradoxical effectiveness of a hot evening bath. The hot water does not heat your core, rather it draws your blood away from your internal organs and pushes it to the surface of your skin. When you step out of the bath, your dilated blood vessels rapidly radiate that heat out into the room, causing your core temperature to plummet, perfectly priming your neurology for deep sleep. Finally, we must address the sheer biological trauma of how we end our nights, the alarm clock. No other species on Earth artificially, suddenly, and loudly terminates its sleep. Awakening to a blaring alarm inflicts a profound cardiovascular shock on the body. It violently activates the sympathetic nervous system, causing an immediate, unnatural spike in heart rate and a surge of the stress hormone cortisol. It is the physiological equivalent of being startled by a predator. To compound this daily trauma, modern society invented the snooze button. By slapping the snooze button and drifting back into a fragmented doze, only to be violently shocked awake again 10 minutes later, we subject our hearts to repeated, punishing cardiovascular assaults. This daily routine of jarring the body out of its restorative state is a profound insult to our biology, a final act of modern sabotage against the very mechanism designed to keep us alive. Chapter 9. The Truth About Sleeping Pills and Therapy. When confronted with the agonizing inability to sleep, millions of desperate individuals turn to a seemingly simple modern solution, the pharmaceutical sleeping pill. The promise is incredibly seductive. Swallow a small tablet, turn off the light, and reliably fall into a state of unconsciousness. Driven by our collective exhaustion and a culture that demands quick fixes, the prescription sleep medication industry has exploded into a multi-billion-dollar empire. Yet, beneath the glossy advertisements and the widespread medical acceptance lies a deeply troubling neurobiological reality. The sleep engineered by these medications is not a biological restoration. It is a chemical illusion, one that exacts a devastating toll on human health. To grasp the danger of these drugs, one must fundamentally understand what they do to the brain. Most modern prescription sleeping pills, such as Ambien, Lunesta, and Sonata, belong to a class of drugs known as sedative hypnotics. They operate by heavily targeting the neurotransmitter GABA, which is the primary inhibitory chemical in the brain. When you take a sleeping pill, it aggressively binds to GABA receptors, flooding the brain with a massive, indiscriminate wave of inhibition. It acts as a blunt instrument, effectively knocking out the higher cognitive functions of the cortex. The state of unconsciousness that follows is not natural sleep. It is a form of light sedation, neurologically indistinguishable from the state induced by consuming alcohol. During a natural night of rest, the brain orchestrates a magnificent, highly coordinated symphony of deep, slow waves and rapid eye movement. When electroencephalogram recordings map the brain waves of an individual under the influence of a sleeping pill, this beautiful architecture is violently distorted. The drug artificially suppresses the deepest, most restorative brainwaves, replacing them with a heavily fragmented, chemically blunted electrical pattern. The patient may subjectively feel that they were asleep because they were unconscious, but their brain has been entirely starved of the crucial, memory-consolidating and physically restorative benefits of genuine biological slumber. The consequences of this chemical sedation rapidly manifest the following day. Because the drug fundamentally degrades the quality of overnight memory processing, individuals frequently wake up with significant grogginess and a profound impairment in their ability to form new memories. More terrifying are the nocturnal side effects. Because the drug heavily sedates the conscious, reasoning brain but does not perfectly induce the paralysis of REM sleep or the deep anchors of natural slow-wave sleep, patients often experience complex unconscious behaviors. Medical literature is replete with documented cases of individuals sleep-eating massive quantities of food, making phone calls, and even sleep driving, all while completely under the influence of the sedative and retaining absolutely no memory of the event upon waking. The most insidious feature of these drugs, however, is the neurological trap they construct. When a patient attempts to stop taking the medication, they inevitably suffer from a severe phenomenon known as rebound insomnia. The brain, having artificially adjusted its neurochemistry to combat the massive nightly influx of the sedative, reacts violently when the drug is suddenly withdrawn. The withdrawal triggers a fierce spike in the sympathetic nervous system. The patient's insomnia returns, but it is vastly worse than before they ever started taking the medication. Convinced that their sleep is irrevocably broken, the terrified patient runs straight back to the prescription pad. It is a vicious cycle of chemical dependency entirely manufactured by the drug itself. Yet, these side effects pale in comparison to the staggering, long-term mortality risks associated with routine sleeping pill use. Extensive epidemiological studies, carefully controlling for thousands of variables including pre-existing health conditions, age, and weight, have revealed a deeply disturbing correlation. Individuals who frequently use prescription sleep medications are significantly more likely to suffer from severe infections, and their risk of dying prematurely is exponentially higher than that of matched individuals who do not take the drugs. Furthermore, there is a striking dose-dependent link between sleeping pill use and the development of cancer. The exact biological mechanisms driving these mortality rates are still being aggressively investigated, but the sheer statistical weight of the danger is undeniable. We are attempting to chemically bludgeon the brain into unconsciousness, and the body is paying a catastrophic price. If the pharmaceutical approach is a failure, what is the alternative for the millions who genuinely suffer from clinical insomnia? The answer lies not in a pill, but in a profound behavioral recalibration. The medical community has now established a highly structured, non-pharmacological treatment that is unequivocally superior to sleeping pills: cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or CBTI. Unlike a pill, which merely masks the symptom of wakefulness, CBTI directly attacks the root causes of the disorder. It recognizes that insomnia is almost entirely fueled by an overactive sympathetic nervous system and the crippling psychological anxiety surrounding the inability to sleep. An insomniac's bed has ceased to be a sanctuary of rest It has become a psychological torture chamber. Through years of tossing, turning, and staring at the clock, the brain has subconsciously forged a powerful associative link. The bed equals a state of intense, agonizing wakefulness. CBTI relentlessly breaks this association using strict behavioral protocols. One of the most counterintuitive, yet highly effective methods is sleep restriction therapy. The clinician forces the patient to drastically reduce the amount of time they are allowed to spend in bed, sometimes to as little as 6 hours a night. This artificially builds up a massive debt of adenosine, the chemical pressure for sleep. When the patient is finally permitted to lie down, this towering sleep pressure rapidly overcomes their neurological anxiety, forcing them to fall asleep quickly and stay asleep continuously. As their sleep efficiency improves, the time allowed in bed is slowly and carefully expanded. Furthermore, CBTI enforces rigid stimulus control. Patients are strictly instructed that they must only use the bed for sleeping. If they wake up in the middle of the night and cannot return to sleep within 20 minutes, they are explicitly forbidden from remaining in bed. They must physically get out of bed, move to a dimly lit room, and engage in a relaxing activity such as reading a book until the biological wave of sleepiness returns. Only then are they allowed to return to the mattress. Through this relentless discipline, the brain slowly relearns the fundamental association that the bed is a trigger for profound unconsciousness, not an arena for anxiety. The clinical trials comparing CBTI to prescription sleeping pills are utterly definitive. In the short term, both methods are effective at reducing the time it takes to fall asleep. However, the moment the sleeping pill is discontinued, the patient's insomnia rapidly returns with a vengeance. When CBTI concludes, the patient does not regress. Because they have physically rewired their neurological associations and behavior, they retain their newfound ability to sleep long into the future. It is a permanent, biologically sound cure, devoid of side effects, grogginess, or mortality risks. In the battle against insomnia, the most powerful tool we possess is not a chemical sedative synthesized in a laboratory, but the innate, restorative power of our own biology, expertly guided back to its natural rhythm. Chapter 10. A New Vision for a Sleep-Deprived Society. To survey the landscape of modern industrialized society is to witness a profound and tragic biological irony. In our relentless pursuit of progress, we have systematically engineered an environment that is deeply hostile to the very foundation of human health. We have constructed vast, complex institutions, our medical systems, our educational frameworks, and our corporate cultures upon the fundamentally flawed premise that the human need for sleep is an inconvenient obstacle to be conquered rather than an absolute biological mandate to be respected. We have stigmatized rest, equating it with laziness, weakness, and a lack of ambition. The resulting epidemic of sleep deprivation is not merely a collection of exhausted individuals. It is a systemic, societal failure that exacts a catastrophic toll on our global economy, our collective well-being, and our very lives. Perhaps nowhere is this systemic failure more deeply entrenched and more immediately lethal than within the very institution dedicated to preserving human life, the medical establishment. To understand the origin of the punishing, sleep-deprived culture of medical training, one must look back to the late 19th century and the creation of the modern medical residency program at Johns Hopkins Hospital. The architect of this system was a brilliant surgeon named William Stewart Halsted. Halsted demanded that young doctors live at the hospital, subjecting them to grueling, continuous shifts that lasted days on end without a moment of rest. His stamina was legendary, and he forged an enduring medical culture that views sleep deprivation as a necessary crucible for forging competent physicians. What was entirely unknown to the medical community at the time, however, was that Halsted's supernatural wakefulness was not the result of immense willpower. It was fueled by a severe, secret addiction to cocaine. We have effectively inherited a medical training infrastructure designed by a cocaine addict, and the modern consequences are devastating. When a resident physician is forced to work a 30-hour continuous shift, their brain rapidly descends into a state of severe neurocognitive dysfunction. The statistics are horrifying. A resident working a marathon shift is over 400% more likely to make a major diagnostic error in the intensive care unit than a well-rested colleague. They are vastly more likely to administer the wrong dosage of medication, accidentally injure a patient during surgery, or miss a critical, life-threatening symptom. Furthermore, when these exhausted young doctors finally leave the hospital and get behind the wheel of a car, their risk of being involved in a severe motor vehicle accident skyrockets. The medical establishment's stubborn adherence to this archaic, sleep-starved rite of passage is not a badge of honor. It is an act of institutional malpractice that results in the preventable deaths of thousands of patients every year. This profound biological ignorance extends directly into our educational systems, where we actively inflict neurological damage upon our youth in the name of administrative convenience. As we have established, the adolescent brain undergoes a massive genetically hardwired shift in its circadian rhythm, pushing the natural time of sleep onset deep into the night. Yet, across the globe, high schools stubbornly ring their opening bells at 7 or 8 in the morning. We are demanding that teenagers perform complex academic tasks and absorb dense information at an hour when their brains are biologically screaming for the restorative brain-sculpting power of deep sleep. The consequences of this misalignment are disastrous. By forcing adolescents to wake before the sun, we sever their access to the final, critical hours of rapid eye movement sleep, the very stage responsible for emotional regulation and complex problem-solving. This chronic deprivation severely compromises their ability to learn, fuels the soaring rates of teenage anxiety and depression, and dramatically increases the likelihood of substance abuse. When progressive school districts have bravely chosen to delay their start times to align with adolescent biology, the results have been universally miraculous. Standardized test scores surge, behavioral problems plummet, and, most importantly, the rate of teenage car accidents drops precipitously. The refusal to universally adopt later school start times is a staggering failure of public policy, effectively trading the neurological development and physical safety of a generation for the convenience of bus schedules. In the adult world, this assault on sleep is enthusiastically sustained by a corporate culture that fetishizes exhaustion. The business world operates on a pervasive, deeply flawed equation. More hours awake equals greater productivity. In reality, the exact opposite is true. Sleep deprivation decimates the very faculties that drive modern economic success: creativity, complex problem-solving, emotional intelligence, and ethical judgment. A sleep-starved employee is unable to focus, struggles to collaborate effectively with colleagues, and is significantly more prone to taking reckless risks and engaging in unethical behavior. The economic hemorrhage caused by this corporate hubris is staggering. When economists calculate the cost of sleep deprivation, factoring in lost productivity, chronic absenteeism, and the massive healthcare costs associated with fatigue-related illnesses, the numbers reach into the hundreds of billions of dollars annually for a single nation, effectively erasing entire percentage points from a country's gross domestic product. By demanding that employees answer emails late into the night and arrive at the office before dawn, corporations are not maximizing their human capital, they are actively bankrupting it. Yet there are pioneers proving that a different path is not only possible but immensely profitable. Organizations at the absolute vanguard of human performance, such as NASA, have meticulously studied the effects of fatigue. Recognizing that the lives of astronauts and the success of multi-billion-dollar missions depend on flawless cognitive execution, NASA institutionalized the culture of the strategic nap. They discovered that a brief 26-minute nap improved pilot performance by an astounding 34% and overall alertness by over 50%. Following this empirical evidence, visionary technology companies like Google have transformed their corporate campuses, installing dedicated nap pods and actively encouraging employees to step away from their desks to sleep. They recognize that a well-rested mind is the ultimate engine of innovation, and that prioritizing sleep is not a concession to weakness, but the most powerful competitive advantage a company can possess. The time has come for a radical global paradigm shift. We must fundamentally redesign the architecture of our society to respect and protect the biological sanctuary of sleep. This requires sweeping, systemic changes. It means reforming medical education to absolutely abolish the marathon shift, replacing it with humane schedules that prioritize patient safety and physician well-being. It means legally mandating later school start times, aligning our educational system with the undeniable realities of human neurodevelopment. In the corporate sphere, it demands a total cultural reversal, where leaders explicitly encourage disconnection after hours and actively reward well-rested employees recognizing sleep as a vital investment rather than an operational cost. Furthermore, we must harness the power of modern technology to repair the environment it has broken. Imagine a future where the lighting in our homes, hospitals, and offices dynamically adjusts its color, temperature, and intensity to perfectly mimic the natural progression of the sun, gently guiding our circadian rhythms rather than violently suppressing them with blue light. Imagine health insurance companies that utilize sophisticated sleep trackers to reward individuals with lower premiums for consistently achieving 8 hours of rest, recognizing that proactive sleep maintenance is vastly cheaper than treating the catastrophic diseases of sleep deprivation. We stand at a critical juncture in the history of human health. For too long, we have treated sleep as a disposable luxury, something to be trimmed, compressed, and sacrificed on the altar of a restless, relentless waking world. We have ignored the ancient, brilliant evolutionary design that requires us to spend a third of our lives in the dark, healing, rebuilding, and dreaming. Sleep is not a choice. It is the ultimate life support system. It is the single most effective, natural, and democratically available medicine we possess. To reclaim our right to a full night of rest is to reclaim our health, our vitality, and our fundamental humanity. The silent epidemic of sleep loss must end. It is time for us to wake up to the absolute necessity of sleep.